The twilight market drifted in the darkness between star systems, a ramshackle collection of interconnected hulls and habitat modules that existed in the legal gray space where three territorial boundaries met and none wanted jurisdiction. Its corridors stank of recycled air, cheap fuel, and desperation. This was where Captain Zira'kai came when she needed to forget. The Scythian sat hunched at a corner table in the rusty coil cantina, her scaled fingers wrapped around a glass of Ventaran whiskey. Her crest, normally held high in the proud manner of her species, drooped slightly. The scales along her jaw were a muted green, betraying her foul mood to anyone who knew how to read Scythian body language. Across from her, First Mate Draken nursed his own drink, a hulking Kravi whose 4 arms made him useful in a fight and whose practical nature made him invaluable as counsel. 3 months, Zira hissed, her forked tongue flickering with agitation. 3 months I pursued that salvage contract. I had the connections, the reputation, the experience. And Vexoth swoops in at the last moment with some fabricated credentials and steals it from under me. Draken rumbled sympathetically, his deep voice like grinding stones. Vexoth has always been a parasite. He survives by feeding on others' efforts. And there he goes. Zira's crest flattened entirely as she watched her rival swagger past the cantina entrance, flanked by 2 of his crew. Captain Vexoth was a meridian, his crystalline form refracting the dim light into rainbow patterns. He caught Zira's eye and had the audacity to nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals that made her blood boil. She was no equal to a contract thief. The whiskey burned going down. Zira poured another glass with more force than necessary. Somewhere below them, she could hear the rhythmic chanting of an auction. The twilight market was one of the few places where slavery still operated openly, a practice most civilized worlds had abandoned centuries ago, but which persisted in the shadows of galactic society. "I should buy something expensive and useless," Zira said suddenly, her intoxication making her words sharper, "just to show that I care so little about his stolen contract that I can throw away credits on nonsense." Draken's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of concern. "Captain, perhaps we should return to the ship." But Zira was already standing, swaying slightly. "No, I want to see what pathetic wretches are being sold today. Maybe I'll buy one and parade it past Vexoth's docking bay." The auction house was 3 levels down, accessed through a narrow corridor that smelled of unwashed bodies and fear. The chamber itself was surprisingly large, carved from the hull of what had once been a colonial transport. Perhaps 100 beings were scattered across the tiered seating, most of them dressed in the nondescript clothing of traders and ship crews who asked no questions. On the raised platform at the center, a Vothian auctioneer with too many teeth was presenting his wares. A young Quellan stood in the spotlight, her feathers dulled from stress. The bidding was lackluster. Zira watched with detached interest as the Quellan was sold to a mining operation for labor. Then the auctioneer brought out something unusual. "And now, honored buyers, something rare for your collections. A genuine human, captured from a colony raid in the outer reaches. Young, healthy, and surprisingly well-trained for such a primitive species." The human was pushed onto the platform by 2 guards. He was shorter than Zira, built compact and solid, with the brown skin and dark hair typical of his species. His face was weathered, marked by exposure to harsh environments, and his eyes were a startling shade of brown that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore simple gray coveralls, the kind given to prisoners and slaves across the galaxy. What struck Zira most was his composure. Unlike the Quellan before him, the human showed no obvious signs of fear or distress. He stood with his weight evenly balanced, his hands loose at his sides, his gaze moving methodically across the audience. He was assessing them, Zira realized. A slave evaluating his potential buyers. The auctioneer rattled off details. Male specimen, approximately 35 standard years, captured 8 months ago. Docile, responds to basic commands in common tongue. Humans make excellent curiosities for private collections, and this one is already trained for basic labor. The bidding started at 200 credits. No one moved. "Come now, surely someone wants to own one of these rare creatures." The human homeworld only joined the galactic community 30 years ago. How many of you can say you've even seen one in person? Someone bid 250 credits, more out of mild curiosity than genuine interest. The auctioneer looked pained. Zira felt the whiskey singing in her blood and the fury still hot in her chest from Vexoth's theft. An idea formed, stupid and petty and perfect. 400 credits, she called out, her voice carrying across the chamber. The auctioneer perked up. The previous bidder waved dismissively, unwilling to go higher for a novelty. Within moments the human was hers. Draken gripped her shoulder with two of his four hands. "Captain, what are you doing?" Making a statement. Zira stood, pleased with herself despite Draken's obvious concern. "Come, let's collect my purchase and take a stroll past Bay 14 where Vexoth is docked. I want him to see exactly how little his stolen contract means to me." The human was brought to them in a processing room. Up close, Zira could see the faint scars on his hands and forearms, the kind that came from manual labor or combat. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw something there that didn't match the auctioneer's description of docile. Intelligence. Calculation. But he said nothing, just waited. "Do you have a name, human?" Zira asked, more to hear him speak than from genuine curiosity. "James Kovak." His voice was low, accent unfamiliar. "Captain." The title surprised her. "You know ship ranks." "I do. And you speak common tongue well." "I do." Draken leaned in close to Zira, his voice dropping. "This one is not what the auctioneer claimed." Zira waved him off. The whiskey was starting to fade, and with it her certainty about this purchase. She'd spent the credits now, and she wouldn't show weakness by backing out. "It doesn't matter. Come, human, you're part of my crew now, try to keep up." She led James through the Twilight Market's corridors, Draken following behind to ensure their new acquisition didn't try to flee. They passed by Bay 14, and Zira was gratified to see Vexoth's crew loading supplies. One of them noticed her approach and alerted their captain. Vexoth emerged from the bay, his crystalline form catching the light. "Zira'kai. Come to congratulate me on my new contract." "Hardly." Zira gestured casually at James. "I've been shopping, bought myself a human. Have you ever seen one? Fascinating creatures. So primitive, yet they've managed to stumble into space travel." Vexoth's form shifted colors, his version of a laugh. "You bought a slave to spite me. How charmingly petty." "Not to spite you," Zira said coolly, even as her crest flushed darker green. "I simply had extra credits to spend and found the purchase amusing. Enjoy your salvage contract, Vexoth. I'll be busy with more interesting pursuits." She walked away before he could respond, her stride as dignified as she could manage. Behind her, she heard Vexoth's crystalline laughter echoing down the corridor. Once they were back aboard the Void's Edge, a Helix-class privateer ship that had seen better decades, Zira's mood crashed entirely. The whiskey had worn off, leaving only a headache and the reality of what she'd done. She'd spent 400 credits they could barely afford on a human slave for no reason other than petty revenge that hadn't even landed properly. "Draken, show him to the spare quarters in the lower deck. Give him access to the common areas and mess hall, and find out what skills he has, if any." "And his status?" Draken asked carefully. Zira's crest drooped. "Crew, lowest rank. I'm not running a slave ship, whatever the paperwork says, but he's under your supervision until I decide what to do with him." Over the next 3 days, James Kovak became a ghost aboard the Void's Edge. He took the quarters he was given, a small cabin that had once been storage space, and asked for nothing. He appeared at meal times, ate efficiently, and disappeared again. When Draken assigned him work in the cargo bay, organizing supply containers and checking seal integrity, he completed the tasks without complaint or comment. The crew didn't know what to make of him. The Void's Edge carried 8 beings besides Zira. Draken as first mate, Velka the weapons officer who was a Trescian with 8 eyes and an obsession with ballistics, Torvik the pilot who was a young Meridian constantly trying to prove himself, Sissa the engineer who was a Quellan with brilliant technical instincts, and 4 others who handled various shipboard functions. They all gave the human a wide berth, uncertain how to interact with a species they'd only heard about in passing. But James was always watching. He memorized the ship's layout within the first day, noting every access corridor, every emergency bulkhead, every weak point in the vessel's design. He observed the crew's routines, learning who woke early, who preferred late shifts, who was friends, and who merely tolerated each other. He listened to their conversations, picking up details about recent jobs, the ship's finances, and Captain Zira'kai's growing desperation for a decent contract. He'd been a tactical officer in the Colonial Defense Force before the raiders hit his transport. 8 months of slavery hadn't broken him because he'd never stopped being a soldier. He'd just been waiting for the right moment, the right situation. Now he was on a privateer ship with a crew that didn't know what to do with him and a captain who'd bought him on impulse. It wasn't freedom, but it was better than the alternative. On the fourth day, everything changed. The Void's Edge was hauling a cargo container of industrial lubricants through the Saravine sector, a route that should have been safe but which always carried risk. Space was too vast for any government to truly police, and ships traveling alone were always vulnerable. James was in the cargo bay, running diagnostics on the container seals as Sissa had taught him, when the ship's alarm system shrieked to life. The lighting shifted to emergency red, and through the ship's intercom came Velka's voice, sharp with tension. Hostile contact, unknown vessel, pirate configuration, captain to bridge. James dropped his tools and moved toward the nearest monitoring station. He called up the external sensor feed, his fingers moving across the interface with the confidence of someone who'd spent years reading tactical displays. The pirate vessel was smaller than the Void's Edge but faster, bristling with weapons. It was a classic intercept pattern, cutting off their escape vector while making aggressive targeting sweeps. Through the intercom, he could hear the bridge communications. Zira's voice, controlled but strained. "This is Captain Zira'kai of the Void's Edge. We're a registered transport with no quarrel with you. Stand down and let us pass." The pirate response was predictable. "Void's Edge, cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resist and we'll blow you to scrap." James closed his eyes, visualizing the tactical situation. The pirates were using intimidation, betting that their target would submit rather than fight. Standard doctrine for raiders, it worked most of the time because cargo ships couldn't afford to take damage. The Void's Edge had weapons, but they were defensive, meant to deter opportunistic attackers, not win sustained engagements. He opened a comm channel to the bridge. "Captain Zira'kai, this is Kovak in the cargo bay." There was a pause. "What do you want, human? We're busy. I have a suggestion for dealing with the pirates." Another pause longer. Then Draken's voice, "You're a cargo handler. What could you possibly suggest?" James kept his voice level. "I'm a tactical officer, or I was before I was captured, and I'm telling you that if you try to fight them directly, you'll lose, but there's another way." "Speak quickly," Zira said. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they're in firing range. Power down your weapons and non-essential systems. Start venting atmosphere from the port side, enough to read on their sensors. Broadcast a distress signal claiming you've suffered a cascade failure and your engines are dying. Make them think you're helpless." "We'll be helpless," Velka interjected. "No, you'll be bait. Pirates want easy targets. If they think you're already crippled, they'll approach carelessly, maybe even with boarding teams instead of just blowing you apart. When they're close point-blank range where they can't maneuver, you power everything up and hit them with everything you have. One shot, make it count." Silence on the bridge. James could imagine their faces, the skepticism. Then Draken's voice, "Captain, it's deceptive." "It's survival," James said. "They're pirates, they don't deserve your honor." More silence. The timer in James's head was counting down, 90 seconds. "Do it," Zira said suddenly. "Torvik, kill the engines but keep the core warm. Sissa, prepare to vent port side on my mark. Velka, power down weapons but stay ready to bring them online instantly. Everyone act panicked on the comms." James felt something unclench in his chest. She'd listened. Maybe there was hope here after all. The deception unfolded perfectly. Sissa vented atmosphere with theatrical timing, making it look like an uncontrolled breach. Zira broadcasted increasingly desperate distress calls. Torvik let the ship drift, its trajectory slowly degrading. To the pirates, it must have looked like their target had suffered a catastrophic failure. James watched through the sensors as the pirate vessel changed its approach, abandoning its aggressive firing position for a closer intercept. They were probably planning to board, strip the cargo, maybe take the crew for ransom or sail. They came in fast and arrogant. 30 meters, Velka reported. 25, 20. Now, Zira commanded. The void's edge came alive like a predator shedding camouflage. Weapons powered up in seconds, targeting systems locking onto the pirate vessel at point-blank range. The first volley caught them completely off guard, punching through their shields before they could even react. Railgun rounds tore into their engine section. Energy weapons slagged their weapon mounts. The pirate ship tried to pull away, but at that range with their engines damaged, they were already dead. The second volley crippled them completely. "Cease fire," Zira ordered. "Torvik, get us out of here before they send a distress call." The void's edge accelerated away, leaving the crippled pirate vessel tumbling in the dark. In the cargo bay, James allowed himself a small smile. It had worked. 10 minutes later, the ship's intercom crackled. "Kovak, report to the captain's quarters immediately." Zira's cabin was larger than James's, but still cramped by any reasonable standard. The walls were decorated with Scythian cultural items, weapons, and honor tokens that spoke to a proud heritage. Zira herself stood near the viewport, her back to him, her crest held rigidly upright. Draken was there too, his 4 arms crossed in a manner that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with this meeting. "Explain yourself," Zira said without turning around. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "I told you. I was a tactical officer. Colonial Defense Force, 7th Fleet. Before the raiders hit my transport. You didn't fight like a tactician, you fought like a deceiver." "No, Captain, I fought like someone who understood the situation and adapted accordingly." James kept his voice respectful but firm. "The pirates expected you to either run or fight. We did neither. We made them think they'd already won, and then we changed the game." Zira finally turned to face him. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, calculating. "This is not how Scythians fight. We face our enemies directly with honor. With respect, Captain, I'm not Scythian, I'm human. And humans learned a long time ago that when you're outmatched in strength, you need to be smarter instead." Draken shifted his weight, a gesture of discomfort. "What he suggests is, it works, but it troubles me. Where does deception end and cowardice begin?" James met the Kravi's gaze steadily. "Cowardice is letting your crew die because you're too proud to bend. Deception is a tool like any other. You don't refuse to use a wrench because it's not as elegant as your hands." Zira was silent for a long moment, her crest shifting through various positions as she processed her thoughts. "You said you were in the Colonial Defense Force. What happened?" "My transport was carrying refugees from a failed colony world. We were 3 weeks from a safe port when raiders hit us. Our escort ship was destroyed in the opening salvo. We had no weapons, no shields worth mentioning. I was trying to organize an evacuation when someone stunned me from behind. Woke up in a holding cell with about 40 other survivors. Spent the next 8 months being sold from one crew to another until I ended up at Twilight Market." "And your family?" "Don't know. The raiders separated everyone. They could be anywhere." Zira's scales rippled, a sign of deep thought. "I bought you as a joke. A petty act of revenge against a rival who doesn't matter. That was dishonorable of me." James said nothing. What could he say? "But now you've proven valuable. My crew is alive because of your suggestion. That creates an obligation." She looked at Draken, who nodded slightly. "I'm not going to keep you as property. That was never my intention despite the paperwork. But I need to know, do you want to stay aboard this ship? Not as a slave, but as crew." The offer surprised him. James had expected to be dropped at the next station with minimal credits, left to figure out his own survival. Instead, this prideful alien captain was offering him something like a place. "What would my role be?" "We need someone who thinks differently than we do. Someone who can see solutions we miss because of our training, our cultures, our assumptions. You'd be an advisor for tactical situations. And if I refuse, then we part ways at the next major station. I'll give you enough credits to book passage somewhere and provide a reference letter if you need one. No hard feelings." James considered it. He had nowhere else to go, no family waiting, no home to return to. His entire life had been the Colonial Defense Force, and that chapter was over. But here, on this aging privateer ship with its mismatched crew, he'd found something unexpected. A purpose, maybe, or at least the possibility of one. "I'll stay, on one condition." Zira's crest rose. You're in no position to make demands, human. I'm not a slave anymore, you said so yourself, so I'm negotiating like crew. James held her gaze. I'll stay and help you, but if I'm going to advise on tactics, you need to be willing to listen even when my suggestions conflict with your cultural preferences. That includes deception, misdirection, and anything else that keeps this crew alive. Draken rumbled. You ask her to abandon her honor. I ask her to expand her definition of it. Is there honor in letting your crew die because you refuse to adapt? Is there honor in losing because you were too rigid to change? Zira's scales darkened, a sign of agitation, but she didn't refuse. You test my patience, human. I test your assumptions, Captain. There's a difference. For a long moment, the cabin was silent except for the ever-present hum of the ship's systems. Then Zira inclined her head, a gesture of grudging respect. Very well. Your crew now, James Kovak, tactical advisor. You'll answer to me and Draken. Your quarters will be upgraded and you'll receive a share of any profits we make. But understand this, if your advice gets my crew killed, I will personally throw you out an airlock. Are we clear? Perfectly, Captain. Good, dismissed. Over the following weeks, James integrated himself into the crew in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. He spent time with each crew member, learning their roles, understanding their capabilities. Velka, the weapons officer, was initially hostile, viewing James as an outsider who'd gotten lucky once. But when James showed her alternative targeting patterns that maximized their limited ammunition, patterns that accounted for predictive evasion rather than just raw accuracy, she began to soften. Torvik, the pilot, was easier. The young Meridian was eager to prove himself and saw James as a teacher rather than a threat. James taught him evasive maneuvers that wasted enemy ammunition, flying patterns that made targeting solutions difficult without requiring fancy flying that could stress the ship's aging systems. Sissa, the engineer, was perhaps the most interesting. The Quellan had an intuitive understanding of systems that went beyond technical knowledge. When James explained what he needed, fake sensor readings that could sell a deception or environmental modifications that could create specific effects, she grasped the concepts immediately and found ways to implement them. But the real test came 6 weeks after James joined the crew, when Zira called everyone to the common area for a meeting. We have an opportunity, she announced, her crest held high. A lucrative contract, but extremely dangerous. I want everyone's input before we decide. She activated a holographic display showing a star chart. Escort mission through the Karrix Corridor, a refugee transport carrying about 200 beings from a war zone to a safe colony. The pay is 60,000 credits. Velka whistled. That's 6 months operating costs. What's the catch? The Karrix Corridor is controlled by the Talon Syndicate. They've been extorting transit fees from anyone passing through, and if you don't pay, they attack with overwhelming force. Multiple ships, coordinated strikes. Most crews won't take jobs through that region anymore. Draken's forearms crossed. Then why would we? It's suicide. Because we're running out of options, Zira said bluntly. Our last 3 jobs barely covered fuel costs. The ship needs repairs we can't afford, and this contract pays enough to solve those problems. The crew erupted in argument. Most were against it, pointing out that the Talon Syndicate's reputation was built on crushing anyone who challenged them. A few thought they could negotiate safe passage. Though Zira shot that down immediately, the Syndicate didn't negotiate anymore, they'd grown too powerful. James had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. Captain, may I see the detailed route? Zira expanded the hologram, showing the full path through the corridor. James studied it, his tactical mind processing the information. The corridor was 3 days' travel with multiple choke points where ambushes would be most likely. The Talon Syndicate operated like a military force, using scouts and communication networks to coordinate their ships. I think we can do it, James said finally. The crew fell silent, staring at him. You're insane, Velka said flatly. Maybe, but consider this. The Syndicate's strength is their reputation. They're so feared that most ships surrender without a fight, but that means they've gotten sloppy. They expect easy victories. That doesn't help us, Draken rumbled. Even sloppy, they have more ships than we do. We don't fight them, we make them not want to fight us. Zira's eyes narrowed. Explain. James pulled up the holographic display, manipulating it to highlight the refugee transport. "We make them think this ship is contaminated, a plague vessel, something they absolutely don't want to board or engage closely." "A deception," Sissa said, her feathers ruffling with interest. "But they'd have sensors, medical scanners. We'd need to fool their technology, not just their eyes." "Can you do it?" The Quellan tilted her head, thinking. "Maybe. If we had samples of the refugees' biology, I could synthesize compounds that would trigger false positives on standard medical scanners. We'd need to stage it carefully, make everything look authentic." "The Syndicate would still investigate," Draken pointed out. "They can't afford to let ships pass through their territory freely, plague or not. They'd send a boarding party to verify." "Then we give them a show," James said. "We stage symptoms, create a convincing scenario, make them so convinced the plague is real that they flee and spread the word to the rest of the Syndicate." The crew looked at each other. Zira's crest was shifting through colors as she processed the plan. "It's elaborate. Many things could go wrong. Many things could go wrong if we fight them directly too. Except in that scenario, we definitely lose. This way, we have a chance." "You're asking us to gamble 60,000 credits and our lives on theatrical performance." "I'm asking you to gamble on being smarter than your enemies. Captain, you hired me to think differently. This is what that looks like." The meeting lasted another hour, with James fielding questions and concerns. Eventually, Zira called for a vote. The crew was split, 4 in favor and 4 against, with Draken abstaining. As captain, the final decision fell to Zira. She looked at James for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then she inclined her head. "We'll take the contract. Kovak, you're in charge of planning. Sissa, work with him on the technical aspects. Draken, coordinate with the refugees when we rendezvous with them. Everyone else, prepare for a 3-day journey through hell. We leave in 6 hours." The next few days were a blur of preparation. James worked closely with Sissa, who proved to be a genius at creating convincing deceptions. She synthesized a compound based on refugee biological samples that would trigger medical scanners to show signs of a hemorrhagic fever, something contagious and deadly. They prepared sections of the refugee transport with theatrical symptoms: fake blood, carefully staged, victims, environmental controls that would make the air seem contaminated. James coached the refugees on their roles. One of them, a Drayan named Korith, who'd been an actor before the war displaced him, volunteered to play a dying plague victim. James taught him how to sell the performance, how to convey suffering without overacting, how to make the Syndicate boarding party believe completely. Meanwhile, the Void's Edge and the refugee transport entered the Karrix Corridor. Tension aboard both ships was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. The first day passed without incident. The second day brought scouts, small Syndicate vessels that shadowed them from a distance. James had the crews execute the plague deception perfectly. Panic transmissions, erratic flight patterns from the transport suggesting a crew barely in control, false biometric readings showing elevated death rates. The scouts maintained their distance, reporting back to their commanders. James monitored their communications, reading the hesitation in their voices. They were unsure, unwilling to risk infection. But on the third day, a Syndicate commander who was more paranoid or clever than his subordinates decided to verify the plague story personally. A boarding ship detached from the main fleet and approached the refugee transport, broadcasting their intention to inspect for contamination. James felt his heart rate increase but kept his voice calm over the comms. "All right, everyone. This is it. Korith, you're on. Sissa, make sure all your environmental effects are running. Captain, have your people on the transport act terrified but cooperative. Remember, we want them to board, to see just enough to believe, and then to run." The Syndicate boarding party consisted of 5 soldiers in heavy armor, accompanied by a medic with scanning equipment. They entered through the transport's primary airlock, weapons raised, clearly expecting trouble. What they found instead was a scene of horror. The lighting in the corridor was dim, emergency power only. The air had a strange thickness to it, Sissa's compounds creating a visible haze. The first body they encountered was staged near the airlock, a Quellan refugee lying in a pool of synthetic blood, skin mottled with what looked like hemorrhagic lesions. James watched through hidden cameras as the Syndicate soldiers advanced cautiously. Their medic ran scans, and James held his breath. The scanner beeped, showing readings that indicated severe biological contamination. The medic's voice was tense. "Sir, these readings are off the charts. Whatever hit these people, it's highly contagious." "Keep moving," the commander ordered, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "We need to verify this isn't a trick." They rounded a corner and found Korath. The Drayan actor was slumped against a wall, his breathing labored and wet. Synthetic blood stained his mouth and clothing. His eyes rolled toward the boarding party, unfocused and desperate. "Please," Korath whispered, his voice perfectly pitched to convey suffering. "Help us. We're dying." The medic approached, scanner active. James had coached Korath to have certain symptoms that would sell the deception. Elevated temperature achieved through carefully hidden heating elements in his clothing, increased heart rate from controlled panic, even pupil dilation from mild stimulants that Sissa had provided. The scanner's readout made the medic step back. "Commander, this man is in systemic failure. Whatever this disease is, it's incredibly aggressive. We need to leave, now." One of the soldiers moved further down the corridor and immediately recoiled. "Commander, there are more bodies. Dozens of them, sir. We need to evacuate this vessel and enforce a quarantine zone." The commander hesitated, clearly torn between duty and survival instinct. James spoke quietly into the hidden comms. "Korath, one more push. Make him believe." The Drayan actor suddenly convulsed, his body seizing in a way that looked horrifyingly real. Blood, theatrical and viscous, poured from his mouth. He reached toward the Syndicate soldiers with a shaking hand, gasping words in his native language that conveyed pure desperation. That broke them. The commander shouted orders to retreat, and the boarding party fled back to their ship. James watched as they sealed their airlocks and immediately activated decontamination procedures. Within minutes, the Syndicate vessel had pulled back, broadcasting warnings to the rest of their fleet. "All ships, this is boarding Team 7. The refugee transport is confirmed contaminated. Biological hazard, extreme contagion. Recommend fleet-wide quarantine protocols and immediate withdrawal. Do not approach these vessels under any circumstances." James let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Captain, I think we just convinced them." "I'm monitoring Syndicate communications," Velka reported. "They're pulling back across the board. Word is spreading fast. No one wants to risk infection." The rest of the journey through the Karrix Corridor was almost anticlimactic. Syndicate ships maintained distance, some even altering their patrol routes to avoid the plague vessels. By the time the Void's Edge and the refugee transport reached the far boundary, the story had spread throughout the entire Syndicate network. They delivered the refugees to their destination colony, where the relieved coordinators transferred 60,000 credits to Zira's account without question. The refugees, still playing their roles until the end, underwent theatrical decontamination procedures before being released into the colony proper. Back aboard the Void's Edge, the crew celebrated with a fervor that surprised James. They'd survived impossible odds without firing a single shot, and the pay would keep them operating for months. Even Velka, who'd been skeptical of James from the start, approached him with something like respect. "That was the most elaborate con I've ever seen," she said, her 8 eyes blinking in sequence. "Insane but brilliant," James smiled. "Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy uses on themselves. We just gave them a reason to be afraid." That night, Zira summoned James to her quarters. She looked different somehow. Less rigid, more thoughtful. Her crest was a color he'd never seen before, something like contentment mixed with uncertainty. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "When I bought you at Twilight Market, it was one of the most shameful things I've ever done. I was drunk, angry, and petty. You were a joke to me, a way to mock a rival who doesn't matter." James said nothing, letting her speak. "But you've proven to be," she struggled with the words. "You've changed how I think, how my crew thinks. We've spent our whole lives following certain codes, certain ways of doing things. Honor, direct combat, traditional approaches. And then you show us that there are other ways, smarter ways. Every species develops their own solutions to survival," James said. Humans just happened to develop ours in an environment where we were rarely the strongest, the fastest, or the most dangerous. We learned to be clever instead. I want to offer you a formal position. Not just as an advisor, but as tactical officer with full crew share and voting rights on major decisions. You've earned it. The offer touched something in James that he thought had died during his months as a slave. Purpose, belonging. I accept. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me yet. Zira's crest darkened. I just received a priority message. The Talon Syndicate has put out a bounty on the Void's edge. Not because of the plague deception, they still believe that. But because word has spread that a ship successfully ran the Karrix Corridor, they can't let that stand without losing face. Multiple hunter crews are converging on our last known position. James felt his tactical mind shift into gear. How long do we have? Maybe 2 days before the first hunters arrive, maybe less. Then we need to make them think they've already won. Zira's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. You say that a lot, because it works. James moved to her holographic display, pulling up star charts. The Syndicate expects us to run, to hide. Instead, we're going to do something they'd never expect. We're going to make ourselves look like we've already been destroyed. Draken, who'd been standing silently in the corner, rumbled forward. Explain. James manipulated the star chart, highlighting a nearby debris field from an old battle. We stage our own death. Send out a distress signal, broadcast false sensor data showing the Void's edge taking catastrophic damage, then go completely dark. We plant evidence in this debris field, pieces of our hull plating with the right serial numbers, maybe a few escape pods we rigged to look like they failed. Make it look like we were hit by raiders or suffered a critical system failure. And while the Syndicate thinks we're dead, Zira asked, we disappear. Change our transponder codes, do some cosmetic modifications to the hull, re-register under a new name. The Void's edge dies and something else takes its place. By the time they figure out the deception, we'll be 3 sectors away with new identities. Sissa's voice came over the intercom. She'd been listening from engineering. I can make it work. We have spare hull plates from the last repair job. I can score them with weapon damage, plant the right residue signatures. The escape pods would be trickier, but I have some ideas. It's elaborate, Draken said, but his tone suggested he was considering it seriously. Many moving parts. Better than trying to outrun or outfight multiple hunter crews, James countered. The Syndicate's strength is coordination and overwhelming force. We can't match that, but we can make them waste resources chasing a ghost while we slip away clean. Zira was silent for a long moment, her crest cycling through colors. James had learned to read those shifts. She was weighing options, considering consequences, balancing her cultural instincts against practical necessity. I spent my whole life believing that honor meant facing challenges directly, she said finally. That running or hiding was cowardice. But you've taught me something, James Kovak. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing and fighting. Sometimes it's being smart enough to survive so you can fight another day. She turned to face him fully, and James saw respect in her eyes. Real respect, earned through proven results and shared danger. Do it. Coordinate with Sissa on the technical details. Draken, have the crew prepare for identity change procedures. We have 2 days to kill the Void's edge and birth whatever comes next. The next 48 hours were a controlled chaos of preparation. Sissa worked miracles in engineering, creating debris that would pass even detailed scans as legitimate wreckage from the Void's edge. She scorched hull plates with precisely calibrated energy weapons to mimic raider fire, seeded the metal with trace elements that matched their engine signature, even rigged 2 old escape pods to look like they'd suffered catastrophic failure during launch. James worked with Torvik on the distress signal, crafting a transmission that would sell the story. It needed to sound authentic, desperate, but not overdone. They recorded it in layers. Initial contact with unknown hostiles, damage reports that escalated realistically, a final garbled transmission that cut off mid-sentence. The kind of thing that told a complete story to anyone listening. Velka handled the cosmetic modifications to the ship itself. Nothing dramatic, just enough to change their profile on long-range scans. She altered the heat signature from their engines, adjusted the configuration of their external sensor arrays, even changed the color of their running lights. Small details that would add up to a different ship. Meanwhile, Draken worked on new identity documents. The Void's Edge would become the Stellar Nomad, registered out of a different sector entirely. New crew manifests, new cargo records, a complete paper trail that would hold up to casual inspection. It was amazing what could be accomplished with the right contacts and enough credits. On the morning of the third day, everything was ready. They jumped to the debris field, a graveyard of ships from a corporate war fought 20 years ago. Hundreds of wrecks drifted in the dark, testament to the futility of that conflict. "All right," James said from his new station on the bridge, a tactical console that Sissa had installed specifically for him. "Let's paint a picture. Torvik, take us to coordinates Gamma 7. Sissa, prepare to deploy the debris on my mark. Velka, I need you to fire on those coordinates with minimal power, just enough to create residual energy signatures." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, executing each step of the deception. The Void's Edge maneuvered into position among the wrecks. At James's signal, they deployed the fake debris, scattering it in a pattern that suggested a ship breaking apart under fire. Velka fired her weapons at empty space, creating energy blooms that would register on any sensors in the area. Then Torvik activated the pre-recorded distress signal. It broadcasted on all standard frequencies, a desperate crew calling for help that would never come. The signal played for 17 seconds before cutting off abruptly, simulating a total power failure. "Now go dark," James ordered. "Everything non-essential off. Minimal emissions. We're dead in space." The Void's Edge powered down to bare survival levels. On sensors, they would look like just another derelict among hundreds. They drifted with the debris field's natural motion, waiting. 6 hours later, the first Syndicate hunter arrived. James watched through passive sensors as the ship, a heavily armed frigate, entered the debris field and began scanning. They picked up the distress signal's residual traces, found the planted debris, detected the weapon signatures. Through intercepted communications, James heard the hunter captain reporting back to the Syndicate. "Target destroyed. Debris field confirms identity as the Void's Edge. Looks like they got hit by raiders or maybe suffered an engine failure. Either way, they're gone. No survivors detected." 2 more hunters arrived over the next several hours, each conducting their own scans, each reaching the same conclusion. The Void's Edge was dead. The bounty was void. The Syndicate's reputation was maintained. On the bridge, Zira watched the hunters depart one by one. "We should wait here another day, make sure they're truly convinced." James agreed. They spent the next 24 hours in silent running mode, watching and listening. The Syndicate Communications Network confirmed the kill, shared sensor data, congratulated each other on maintaining their control of the Karrix Corridor. The hunt was officially over. Finally, when James was certain no more hunters were coming, he nodded to Zira. "Captain, I think we're clear. The Void's Edge is officially dead." "Then let's bring the Stellar Nomad to life," Zira said. "Torvik, take us out of here. Minimum emissions until we're clear of this sector. Set course for the Verindi station. We have repairs to make and a new identity to establish." As the ship, now bearing its new name in fresh paint and altered transponder codes, slipped away from the debris field, the crew gathered in the common area. The mood was celebratory but also contemplative. They'd survived multiple impossible situations through deception, misdirection, and clever thinking. They'd become something different from the straightforward privateer crew they'd been months ago. Velka raised a glass of Ventaran whiskey. "To the human who taught us to fight with our brains instead of just our weapons." "To James," Sissa added, her feathers ruffled in what James had learned was Quellan contentment. The crew echoed the sentiment, and James felt something warm in his chest. These beings had been strangers 3 months ago. Some of them had looked at him as a curiosity, others with suspicion. Now they were something like family, an odd, dysfunctional, cross-species family, but family nonetheless. Draken approached him later, when the celebration had mellowed into quiet conversation. The big Kravi had been one of the most skeptical about James's methods from the start. "I owe you an apology," Draken rumbled. "When the captain first brought you aboard, I thought you were a waste of credits. Then when you started suggesting deceptions and tricks, I thought you were teaching us cowardice. And now I understand. You weren't teaching us to be cowards. You were teaching us to survive. There's honor in that, even if it looks different from what I was taught. James clasped the Kravi's lower right arm in the gesture of respect he'd learned. Your traditions aren't wrong, Draken. They're just not the only way. Every species survives differently. Scythrians value direct confrontation because it worked for them. Humans learned misdirection because we needed it. Neither is better or worse, they're just different tools. Perhaps, but your tools have kept us alive when ours would have failed. That means something. After Draken moved away, Zira approached. She'd changed her ceremonial scales, now wearing colors that James had learned indicated a leader who'd achieved a significant victory. But her expression was thoughtful rather than triumphant. I've been thinking about what comes next, she said quietly. Word will spread about what we've accomplished, not the details but the results. A crew that ran the Karrix Corridor successfully, a ship that escaped Talon Syndicate hunters. Other captains will hear about it even if they don't know it was us under a different name. Is that a problem? It's an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility. She looked at him directly. You've changed how we operate, James. You've shown us that survival isn't just about strength or honor or following tradition. It's about adapting, thinking creatively, using every advantage you have. That's the human way, James said. We've never been the strongest or the fastest. We learned to be the smartest or at least the most flexible. I want to offer you something, Zira said. Not just a position on my crew, but a partnership. You bring tactical expertise that none of us have. You think in ways that complement our strengths and cover our weaknesses. I want you as my second in command, equal with Draken, joint authority, joint decision-making. James was genuinely surprised. Captain, I've only been aboard a few months. Some of your crew have been with you for years. And none of them have saved us as many times as you have. This isn't about seniority, James. It's about capability and trust. You've proven both. He considered the offer carefully. 3 months ago, he'd been a slave, property to be bought and sold. Before that, he'd been a refugee fleeing a destroyed colony. The idea of having a real position again, a place where he mattered, was almost overwhelming. I accept, he said finally, but only if Draken agrees. I won't create division in your command structure. Zira's crest shifted to an amused color. I already discussed it with him. He suggested it, actually. Said that your skills and his experience would balance each other well. Then yes, Captain, I'm honored. Good, because we're going to need every advantage we can get. She pulled up a holographic display showing incoming messages. We've received 3 contract offers since word started spreading about our capabilities. All of them are high risk, high reward, the kind that other crews won't touch. James scanned the contracts. One was an extraction mission from a hostile station. Another was escorting a diplomat through disputed territory. The third was investigating a derelict ship in an area known for unexplained disappearances. Any of these would be dangerous, he said. But you're thinking we could do them, aren't you? I can see it in your face. James smiled. I'm thinking that 3 months ago your crew would have looked at these and said no immediately. Now we have options. We have approaches that other crews don't. We can take risks they can't because we think differently. Humanity, fuck yeah, Zira said, attempting the human phrase with her forked tongue. The pronunciation was terrible, but the sentiment made James laugh. Something like that, Captain. They stood together at the viewport, watching the stars stream past as the newly christened stellar nomad made its way toward Verindi Station. Behind them, the crew continued their celebration, voices mixing in a dozen languages, species that had been strangers learning to work together in ways none of them had anticipated. James thought about the journey that had brought him here. Captured, enslaved, bought as a joke by a drunk alien captain who wanted to spite a rival. It should have been the worst thing that ever happened to him. Instead, it had become a second chance. He'd lost his old life, his colony, possibly his family. But he'd found something new here. A crew that valued him, a captain who trusted him, a purpose that went beyond just surviving day to day. What are you thinking? Zira asked. I'm thinking that the galaxy sees humans as primitives, newcomers who barely understand how things work out here, and maybe they're right in some ways. We don't have the technology of the elder races. We don't have centuries of tradition and cultural refinement. But, but we have something they've forgotten if they ever had it. We know how to adapt. We know how to look at an impossible situation and find the angle nobody else sees. We know how to turn weakness into strength. Zira's crest shifted to a thoughtful color. Is that what you've been teaching us? To think like humans? No, Captain. I've been teaching you to think like yourselves, but without the limitations your cultures impose. You don't need to become human. You just need to remember that there's more than one way to solve any problem. The galaxy isn't going to like that, Zira said. If more crews start operating the way we do, it's going to disrupt a lot of established patterns. Good, James said firmly. Established patterns are how the strong stay strong and the weak stay weak. Disruption creates opportunities, and right now humanity needs every opportunity we can get. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Zira turned away from the viewport, her posture straightening into command mode. All right, tactical officer. We have 3 days until we reach Verindi Station. I want a full analysis of all 3 contract offers, complete with approach strategies, risk assessments, and backup plans. Show me how a human would handle each one. You're going to take one of them, aren't you? Zira's scales rippled with what James had learned was her version of a smile. We're going to take whichever one you convince me we can survive. That's what a tactical officer does, isn't it? Find the path through impossible situations. James nodded, already running scenarios in his mind. I'll have reports ready by morning. See that you do. And James, welcome to the command crew. Try not to get us all killed with your crazy human ideas. No promises, Captain. As James made his way to his quarters, now upgraded to reflect his new status, he passed crew members who nodded respectfully or called out greetings. Velka waved with 2 of her 8 eyes. Torvik gave him a traditional meridian salute. Even Sissa, usually absorbed in her technical work, paused to chirp something that James's translator rendered as "good job." In his cabin, James pulled up the contract offers on his personal terminal and began the detailed analysis Zira had requested. His tactical training, dormant during his months as a slave, came roaring back. He saw angles, opportunities, risks, and solutions. His mind mapped out scenarios, backup plans, contingencies for the contingencies. This was what he was good at. This was who he was beneath the slave collar they'd removed months ago. Not just a human, but a soldier, a strategist, someone who looked at chaos and found patterns. The galaxy thought humans were primitive curiosities, barely worth noticing. But James knew something they didn't. Humanity had spent its entire history as the underdog, fighting for survival against bigger predators, harsher environments, impossible odds. They'd learned to be creative, adaptable, relentless. Now James was bringing those lessons to the stars, teaching a privateer crew to think outside the rigid boxes their cultures had built. And if a single crew could accomplish what they'd done in just 3 months, what could humanity accomplish as a species once they truly understood the game being played? The answer, James thought as he worked through tactical scenarios deep into the night, was going to surprise a lot of people. The stellar nomad, formerly the Void's Edge, sailed on through the darkness between stars. Aboard, a crew that had learned to think differently, prepared for whatever challenges came next. And at the heart of it all, a human tactical officer who'd been bought as a joke was becoming something else entirely. He was becoming exactly what the galaxy needed, even if it didn't know it yet. Someone who refused to accept that impossible meant impossible. Someone who looked at every rule and tradition and asked, "But what if we did it differently?" Zira had rescued him as a joke. Now he was teaching her crew how to win. And this, James thought with quiet satisfaction, was only the beginning.